Hey folks, Phil Gallagher of ThrabenU here for a bit of a theory video on death and taxes. So, I was planning on streaming a league last night, and then Magic Online was having severe lag issues, and I decided against it, but I still wanted to give you all a video today. So, today what we're going to do is kind of break down a couple of recent death and taxes deck lists and see what people are trying out in the metagame. Death and Taxes is a deck that's always best when it can be geared to fight a specific threat, and right now, we don't know what that threat is. We don't know if we should be planning for Blue-Red Delver, or Bug Delver, or Grixis Delver, or Blue-White Control, or Grixis Control, or Bug Control. And before we have that information, it's really hard to build optimal deck lists. So what I want to do instead is show off what people are trying right now and kind of give you some of my thoughts on that. The first deck list here by One Ride is a little bit greedy in terms of its mana base. Now, right now, when I think about things that are going to be returning in the wake of the ban cards, one of the first things that comes to my mind and the minds of most people is Red Prison. Like Chalice of the Void is back on the menu, and Red Prison is often one of the default Chalice of the Void decks along with Eldrazi. Well, if we're expecting more Blood Moons in the format and we're expecting more Wastelands in the format, is this the time to be playing things like Silent Clearing and Flagstones? My gut says no, but keep in mind that I tend to be a little bit more conservative with mana bases than most Death and Taxes pilots. The main deck here is relatively unexciting, and the flex slots have gone towards Spirit of the Labyrinth and Phyrexian Revoker. Now, Phyrexian Revoker is a nod to something like Red Prison and the Planeswalkers that come with it coming back. Revoker, I'm not going to say is a mainstay of the deck anymore. Skyclave Apparition does a lot of the lifting that Phyrexian Revoker does. But if we start seeing more things like Ant coming back as well, and results seem to say that that deck is at least okay positioned, having more relevant 2-drop plays is certainly important. When I look at the sideboard of this deck, I see someone that wanted to beat combo. There aren't very many cards for fair matchups here. And some of the things that are for fair matchups, like Cataclysm, are very narrow. And I don't know that I like this sideboard accordingly. What do you do when you're just paired against a fair creature deck? You have 2 Path to Exile and that's it? Can't replace a lot of your things like Spirit of the Labyrinth that are going to be really weak, or maybe Thalia that's going to be really weak in those creature mirrors. This is someone who wanted to be beating combo decks with this sideboard. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're playing Priest and Deafening Silence and Trap and Rest in Peace and Prelate and Surgical, you're not leaving yourself with very much for fair decks. Um, so this is a fine starting point, but this is maybe overly geared towards beating combo. Now let's take a look at 2 lists from the Legacy Challenge. First one here is by Shiro Mooney. Now, sort of like before, there are a number of flex slot lands that just aren't planes. There's a Flagstones, a Factory, and 1 Silent Clearing. As far as the creature suite in the main deck goes, this one is a little bit more varied. And notably, maybe most notably, it has a Palace Jailer in the main deck. In recent times, the combination of Icefang Coatl and Oko meant that it was very hard to hold the Monarch status versus many decks, because there was haste damage that could go and steal that crown and make all of your plans fall apart. Now, Icefang Coatl is a playable card, maybe not a good card anymore. I've played some leagues with Icefang Coatl this week, and let me tell you, it is not turned on and having death touch nearly as frequently as it used to be, and certainly not as quickly. So that might mean that people start going towards things like Baleful Strix instead, which, don't effectively have haste at all. And in those sorts of worlds, you can plan around those threats a little bit better, and the Monarch becomes a little bit more usable. Is it still going to be good? I don't know, but I totally understand wanting to test it out again. It's the sideboard of this deck that I really wanted to talk about. I feel like the sideboard of this deck is a little bit cute for the sake of being cute. There are things like Active Authority and Engineered Explosives and Karn here that are not necessarily staples of this deck list. And while these cards can do some cool things that other cards can't, is playing Active Authority really better than playing the much more flexible Council's Judgment? You know, is that EE, which can be pumped out for one, maybe two every once in a great while when you have silent clearing? Is that really where you want to be with your sideboard slots? And similarly, is Karn really going to be better than something like Gideon? Now, Karn is something that has seen play in the Death and Taxes sideboard in the past. It can be a source of card advantage. It can make some small-ish creatures. I don't know that I would be on Karn over Gideon right now, um, if I was going to be testing out things of that general nature. I feel like this sideboard is trying new things rather than being the most fine-tuned list that's available. All right, and then let's look at one more deck list here, which also has a couple of interesting things in it. The mana base of this list is much more solid, the only flex non-basic land being 1 Flagstones. It's got a clutch 8 planes to 4 snow-covered planes split because you want to hedge against predict a little bit, but you like the art of one of your lands better. I'm gonna level with you. I don't know exactly what's going on there. But let's talk about the creatures in the main deck here. This list has a Charming Prince. Now, why would you want to try out Charming Prince right now? Plague Engineer is expected to be one of the most dominant creatures in the coming format, right? And if we take a look at a lot of the flex creatures that are in other builds here, we see Spirit of the Labyrinth, we see Phyrexian Revoker. Charming Prince, over here, little buddy. Charming Prince is a 2/2. Charming Prince is a flex slot creature that has an okay effect, but a body that doesn't die instantly to Plague Engineer. And that's definitely worth something. Similarly, Thalia Heretic Cathar also has 2 toughness. So when I look at this list, I go, hey, Isolated System was probably thinking about Plague Engineer and didn't want a whole bunch of their threats to have 1 toughness. And that's just like very, very apparent to me. I think the sideboard here is relatively balanced and I like it a good amount. There's a good mix of combo hate while also having just some cards that are a little bit more flexible and generic. Like we see the Palace Jailer and the Council's Judgments here that can come in for whatever fair matchup that you happen to get paired against. And I like a lot of what I see here. Now, are Charming Prince and Thalia Heretic Cathar the best flex slots that you're going to see? I don't know, but I understand exactly what this person is trying to test when they're going about their deck list. And I think when you go and look at a bunch of lists and you're trying to figure out like what should my deck look like for this weekend, you shouldn't just like net deck without thinking. You shouldn't just go grab a list and like play that. You should spend 5 minutes and think, what is this person trying to do with their list? So, like, just recapping in 30 seconds here, this first list wants a little bit extra value out of the mana base and wants more 2-drop plays with Spirit of the Labyrinth and Phyrexian Revoker. The sideboard was geared towards beating combo. Whereas this deck here is trying to go a little bit bigger with the main deck, having that Palace Jailer there for some of the fair mid-rangey stuffs, and is experimenting quite a bit with the sideboard. This final list is most certainly trying to play around Plague Engineer a bit with a more conservative and balanced sideboard. this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to D&T right now because the deck lists are really in flux. Hey, if everyone is going to be playing, say, bug decks, Iron Crusaders are great again, right? The format's going to slow down and we're going to see a whole bunch of mid-range mirrors or pseudo mirrors like fights against Maverick, then having some things like Luminarch Aspirant, which can generate a whole bunch of value over time and become really good. But if we end up tilting in the direction of, say, blue-white control, maybe you don't want Mirror Crusaders, maybe it's time to revive something that hasn't seen the light of day in a while, like a Brightling or the blue-white sword as a sideboard slot. Be thinking about what you are trying to accomplish with your Death and Taxes lists right now. What are you trying to beat? Where is the metagame going? Asking yourself these sorts of questions will help you build better lists and be able to read these lists better. All right, that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a like, leave me a comment, and specifically if you are playing Death and Taxes right now and you have some cool tech, let me know. I'm hoping to record some Taxes leagues sometime in the not too distant future, and I'd love to see what people are doing. Have a great rest of the day.